British Prime Minister Keir will host Ukrainian President Zelensky at Downing Street. In just a few hours' time, Ukrainian delegation is now in London after flying in from the US. This was the moment playing touchdown ahead of tomorrow's meeting of European leaders in London for that security summit meeting between the two leaders follows President Zelensky's clash. Of course, with President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance in the Oval Office. Yesterday, President Trump accused the Ukrainian leader of gambling with World War I, and have not being grateful for the support of the U.S. President Zelensky, made it clear there should be no compromises with President Putin. Following those exchanges, the president of Ukraine was ordered to leave. The White House, the American minerals deal was not signed. U.S. President later said President Zelensky could return when he was ready for peace. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale reports. President Zelensky arriving in the UK this morning, ahead of a meeting with the Prime Minister and European leaders, hoping perhaps for a warmer welcome than the intemperate shouting match he got at the White House in extraordinary furious exchanges. Donald Trump and his number two angrily railed at Ukraine's president, accusing him of being disrespectful for resisting a ceasefire deal without security guarantees. Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel. I'm not telling you because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember this, you're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. It was rude, it was brutal and unrelenting, but was it deliberate? You're right now not in a very good position. They accused him of being ungrateful for us support. Have you said thank you? And no, in this entire meeting, you said thank you, went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition. In October, offer some words of appreciation to the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country. And with that, Ukraine's president was shown the White House door with no press conference, no minerals deal, and something more than a flea in his ear. In Russia, the exchanges were played out in full. The news presenters talking of a diplomatic train wreck and public political execution. No word yet from President Putin. You may have enjoyed what Mr. Trump called great television. The RA made headlines too across Europe, whose leaders will gather in London tomorrow to discuss the crisis and what can be done, if anything, to calm the rally and secure Ukraine's future. Overnight, on social media, allies from across the world posted words of comfort for President Zelensky, who replied to everyone saying simply, "Thank you for your support." Is that support enough as the war continues? Russian drones striking a hospital overnight in Ukraine and Europe now face a tough question. How long could they resist Russian forces if Donald Trump pulled the plug on U.S. military aid? James Landale, BBC News. Well, as we mentioned, President Zelensky is meeting Keir ahead of tomorrow's summit in London. Let's bring in our political correspondent, Helen Catt, who's here. Hi, Helen. So just a few hours away, this meeting in Downing Street between the two men. What's the significance of it now? Well, this is going to be it's clearly a very tense, very delicate situation diplomatically this weekend, and it has always been the case that Volodymyr Zelensky was supposed to have a meeting with Keir Starmer. It's the UK that has convened this summit that you heard James talking about of European leaders that's happening tomorrow. Volodymyr Zelensky was always coming, and there was always an intention that he was going to have a one-on-one meeting in Downing Street with Starmer. But obviously, since the events of yesterday and what we saw in the Oval Office, that will have very much changed the conversation and the tone of this whole weekend. And it also does actually really put the spotlight on the UK. You know, Volodymyr Zelensky is here on British soil now. It's very much KD's hot potato to handle this weekend. And this meeting that we're going to see in a few hours' time at Downing Street, obviously it's going to be very different in tone to the meeting and the pictures we're seeing here in the White House. Do we have any sense of what the two men will be discussing? What points Keir Starmer will want to be emphasizing to the leader of Ukraine? So to be honest, we don't know what they're going to talk about. Apart from we know that it's obviously going to be around support for Ukraine, and Kama has mentioned his unwavering support, as he puts it, for Ukraine and how to improve their position. I think what's interesting, though, is that Volodymyr Zelensky, since he landed, President Zelensky has this afternoon put out a series of posts on social media in which he does talk about being truly thankful for us support, and says that it is crucial that he has us support, but he reiterates this core point, which where there is a bit of division, which is that he is saying that he will not sign up to a ceasefire if there are no security guarantees, and he wants those backed by the U.S., whereas President Trump sees it the other way around. And in recent days, Kay has been more echoing the Trump view that you can have a ceasefire first and then put the security guarantees in later. We'll have to see whether that is still his position when he meets Zelensky later, or what comes out of that, because that is the sort of the heart of this, that where there is that real division or difference in opinion. Okay, let's look ahead to the summit in a bit more detail tomorrow. Clearly agendas. Top of the list, things will have been ripped up and rewritten. Now, what should we be looking out for at the end of this summit tomorrow? Well, there is going to be pressure for something to come out of this summit, because having sort of spoken to people over the week, it's not entirely clear that there is what the end result would be after. It's not like, for example, when you have a formalized summit and there's going to be an agrees communique or something like that. At the end of it, I'm not sure that there was necessarily that sort of thing envisaged from it. But the point of it is to drive forward. Downing Street has said the European effort towards getting towards a lasting peace deal, and we know that they're going to talk about things like ongoing military support and things like sanctions on Russia. The context, though, in which they're having these discussions is completely different. From what they were expecting, there's been this very carefully choreographed week from Downing Street where you had the UK announcing it was going to raise its defense spending earlier in the week. Then that visit to Washington from Keir Starmer on Thursday, which went very well with Donald Trump. You know, the expectation was they'd be going into this weekend with the U.S., brought a little bit further on side, having signed a minerals deal with Ukraine, having met Zelensky in the White House, and that having gone well. Obviously, that is very much not the case. And so now what they're looking at is talking about European contributions and European support, but in the context of far shakier American support. And that's quite a different context to be discussing, so I think there will be increased scrutiny on what does come out of that meeting tomorrow. What can the Europeans alone offer towards